We have, when we've laid out all our manuscripts, we've identified 3 manuscript families. If we were in an actual course where we were talking about biblical criticism and so forth, yes, we could argue, are there more families? Are there families inside of these families? We'll let scholars debate that until they're blue in the face, all right? For our purposes this morning, and as a general truth, there are 3 text types. There's the Western text type. You can see that's Europe. There's the Byzantine text type. That's the Eastern text type. And then there's the Alexandrian text type. That's the Africa and the South text type. There are variances that are unique to manuscripts. And when we see that variant crop up in a couple manuscripts, we seem to think they must be related. If we were to draw out their genealogy, we would think that one might be a copy of the other, or they both might be a copy of a common source. And when we've laid all of those out, we start to see that there are variances that are Byzantine variances. There are variances that are Alexandrian variances. And there are variances that are Western variances. They're unique. Or they're unique to 2 of them, but not the same one. Now, these variances might not be a bad thing. They might not be a bad thing. Because when we can identify when a variant enters the text, if we can prove that the variant doesn't enter the text until much later, then it's probably not a valid variant, right? It's only when we have 2 texts that are very early and they contain a variant that there we might have a little bit of a debate over what was the original reading, probably. Another thing that can happen that's very helpful is if a church father quotes the New Testament, if his quotation contains the variant, that can help us isolate the variant. If, for example, Justin Martyr quotes the New Testament and contains the variant, that dates the variant to the 2nd century. That means it was there sometime in the 2nd century and it was known in the West. If, for example, John Chrysostom quotes the New Testament and it contains a variant, that means that that variant is known in the 4th century in the Byzantine texts. Or if Augustine quotes the text and it has the variant, that shows that the variant is at least from the 4th or from the 5th century and it's from the Alexandrian. But if they quote the New Testament and it doesn't contain the variant, that gives us some indication that it wasn't known to them or it wasn't a variant in their day, meaning it must be after the 2nd century, it must be after the 4th century, it must be after the 5th century. Once again, telling us that if the variant enters the text later, it probably doesn't go back to the original. That makes sense, right? The oldest family is the Alexandrian family. It dates to the 2nd century, and we have examples that might date to the 1st century. Here, in the Alexandrian, we get papyrus. That is the reeds glued together and the writing. It's much more likely in the other 2 families we're going to get vellum or we're going to get codexes. We're probably not going to get papyrus. Papyrus tells us that it's probably much earlier because papyrus was much cheaper, it was easily portable, and even the poor could get their hands on papyrus. Whereas vellum and paper and parchment, those become expensive as we move into the 2nd, 3rd, 4th century, and those are not available to the poor. Those are available to the middle class or to the upper classes. Most of our modern translations today are based on the Alexandrian text type. That's because it's the oldest text type, meaning it's closer to the original. If it's closer to the original, there's less chance that variances have entered the text. Here again, and we'll explain the difference between the Western and between the Alexandrian and the Byzantine text. Once again, if a variant doesn't appear in the Alexandrian text and it's not old, then it's probably not going to be in your modern translation. Which, once again, the King James Onlyists are going to say, see, they're taking things out of the Bible. And the, counter-argument is, no, they're not. They're going to the source. They're going to a much earlier date and seeing that that text isn't probably in the original. I will cite, there are people who argue for the age of the Byzantine text. I'll let them make their argument. I'm not going to make their argument.